Coming up on this Friday edition of Daybreak, the key parameters to a deal on Iran's nuclear program are agreed, including restrictions on enrichment in exchange for sanctions being lifted. President Park Geun-hye and visiting U.S. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi see eye to eye on pressing Japan to resolve the issue of its wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Plus, the top US and Russian nuclear envoys meet in Moscow to discuss ways to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us, to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, April 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story, a big, huge step forward in the world's efforts to reach a nuclear accord with Iran this morning. World powers and Tehran have come to an agreement on an outline agreement to shape the future of Iran's nuclear program. For more, we connect to Eunice Kim, who's following the developments for us at the News Centre. Good morning, Eunice. And we were asking, will they, won't they? And it looks like they have.
That's right, Mark. It was a long 8 days of tough negotiations between the 7 major powers, packed with all-night sessions. U.S. President Barack Obama has called it a historic understanding that greenlights and sets the tone for the drafting of a more comprehensive agreement in 3 months' time. Let's go ahead and start with that announcement that came down just a couple hours ago.
Today, we have taken a decisive step. We have reached solutions on key parameters of a joint comprehensive plan of action. The political determination, the goodwill, and the hard work of all parties made it possible.
As President and Commander-in-Chief, I have no greater responsibility than the security of the American people. And I am convinced that if this framework leads to a final comprehensive deal, it will make our country, our allies, and our world safer.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif at that announcement with EU's Mogherini called the framework a win-win outcome reached after a record number of all-night talks among officials of such a senior level, including those between Kerry and Zarif himself. The agreement greenlights the negotiators to begin writing the text of this final accord based on this framework that is to be completed by the end of June.
And Eunice, we know the details of the framework, they're just coming in, really. We also know that Iran's economic sanctions, was a major sticking point. So how was this ironed out? Well,
Mark, this is a point that Iran's foreign minister was optimistic on, as EU nations and the U.S. have agreed to lift sanctions in phases after the UN confirms that Iran is complying with its promises. Now, Tehran has made a number of promises, including pushing back, or rather reducing, its uranium enrichment capacity, and economic sanctions will snap back if those the level of those agreements are found to have not been followed. Iran will reduce its installed centrifuge, and of course we will be following the details of that agreement as they come in as well. And finally, before I go, a scene of chaos on a university campus in northeastern Kenya after al-Shabaab militants stormed in and killed dozens of students and staff. The death toll has risen to 147 in that strike at Garissa University College that wreaked terror and confusion when Somali Islamists attacked early in the morning. Police and soldiers surrounded the college and exchanged gunfire with the attackers throughout the course of the day. They also took hostages. Officials say the day was a very sad one for Kenya.
Well, thank you to Eunice Kim there for giving us the international news at the top of the show. Such a big day in regards to that Iran nuclear deal. Now, let's look at the news a little closer to home. And President Park Geun-hye is calling for US Congress support to address the issue of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Meeting in Seoul on Thursday, US House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi agreed with President Park, saying Japan needs to address its past wartime sexual slavery as a human rights issue. Ji Myung-gil has more.
Nancy Pelosi called for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to apologize for the Japanese military's coercion of young Korean and other Asian women into sexual slavery during World War II.
We have been clear about what we'd like to hear about comfort women. Whether the Prime Minister does that in that speech or not, I hope that a statement will be made.
It's an issue that Seoul has repeatedly pressed on Tokyo. During talks earlier with President Park Geun-hye, Pelosi expressed sympathy over the matter, saying it's a women's rights issue that should be solved. President Park pushed its urgency as the last surviving Korean victims are in their late 80s. Korea hopes to help U.S. lawmakers better understand the issue of Japan's wartime wrongdoings ahead of Abe's address to a joint session of the U.S. Congress. Diplomatic relations between Korea and Japan have been very tense, with the Abe administration reluctant to clearly acknowledge Japan's past. Seoul had criticized Abe for attempting to shift the blame for the forcible recruitment of the so-called comfort women to private brokers, denying the Japanese government's involvement. Pelosi and the other 9 members of Congress will head to Japan on Friday. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
And Nancy Pelosi also met with Korean Foreign Minister Byungse, where Minister Yoon is reported to have said the Japanese Prime Minister should specifically refer to Tokyo's past acknowledgement of its wartime sexual enslavement in his upcoming US congressional speech. Seoul's foreign ministry said Yoon asked for Washington's support on the matter so that Abe's speech can send a positive message to Korea and other countries that were so horribly affected by Japan's imperialist atrocities. It's the first time the Korean minister has called for expressions such as Japan's past aggressions, colonial rule and comfort women issue in regards to Abe's speech. Pelosi, however, is reported to have maintained a position that the inclusions are the Japanese leader's decision. Now, tensions continue to simmer over North Korea's unilateral demand for a pay rise for its workers at the joint Kaesong industrial complex. The South Korean government is calling for a wage freeze until an inter-Korean agreement is reached, warning of legal measures against companies that disregard that order. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports.
In a statement on Thursday in Seoul, the Unification Ministry asked for a minimum wage freeze for North Korean workers until a deal is reached between the two Koreas. The ministry warned that companies ignoring the freeze could face administrative and legal measures under the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act. The statement comes just over a week before payday for the workers starts on April 10th. Last month, North Korea demanded a unilateral pay raise and revision of 13 regulations, including scrapping the current salary cap of 5%. South Korea says these issues must be settled through government-level talks. The wage tussle is raising concerns that another unilateral shutdown of the complex could follow. But experts say Pyongyang will refrain from repeating the closure it initiated 2 years ago.
If the Kaesong industrial complex closes again, it'll be hard to turn inter-Korean relations around. So it's highly likely that North Korea will use it as a means to intimidate and pressure South Korea.
The Kaesong industrial complex, where more than 54,000 North Koreans work at 124 South Korean companies, is the last remaining form of inter-Korean cooperation. A high-ranking South Korean official said that the best way to improve the management of the joint business park is to open it up to more foreign companies. Now, both sides agreed to that measure nearly 2 years ago, but little progress has been made so far. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea has slammed the Japanese government for police raids on a pro-Pyongyang group in Tokyo in connection with an investigation into the country's past abductions of Japanese nationals. North Korea says such moves make the prospect for bilateral talks impossible. Gwon-soo reports.
Pyongyang isn't happy about the way Japan is investigating North Korea's abduction of Japanese nationals in the 1970s and 80s. The North State-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday that Pyongyang sent a letter to Japan denouncing raids on the General Association of Korean Residents in Japan, a pro-North Korean body that functions as the de facto North Korean embassy in Tokyo. Pyongyang called it a severely political provocation and an infringement of Pyongyang's sovereignty, and is not only seeking an explanation, but also an apology. The North Korean regime also accused Japan of, quote, playing up the abduction issue internationally. Last year, Japan and the EU submitted a draft resolution to the UN against North Korea's human rights abuses, including the matter of abductees. Relations between the two countries appear to be souring. This latest complaint comes less than a year after Pyongyang and Tokyo both agreed on investigations into the abduction issue at a meeting in Stockholm. Tokyo had lifted some sanctions in return for the probe, but so far North Korea hasn't delivered any results. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Now, concerns are mounting over the possible deployment of the U.S. Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense System, more commonly known as THAAD, to the Korean Peninsula. This comes as the South Korean and American defense chiefs are set to meet in Seoul next week. Connie Kim reports.
Will they or won't they? With around a week remaining until U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter arrives in Seoul for talks with his South Korean counterpart Han Min-gu, the elephant in the room is whether they touch upon the possible deployment to the Korean Peninsula of the U.S. missile defense system called THAAD.
The U.S. government has not formally proposed talks on THAAD. If Carter suggests official discussions, it becomes a political issue. Seoul and Washington will then be pressed to make a decision.
Some observers believe a bigger issue needs to be addressed before the U.S. proposes talks about THAAD. Experts say that Seoul and Washington would have to agree on the severity of the North Korean nuclear threat in order for THAAD talks to proceed.
Budget sequestration in the U.S. meant defense spending was cut. The U.S. believes North Korea has scaled up its nuclear threat, so the Pentagon says it needs more funds. The South Korean government, on the hand, is not keen on increasing its defense budget.
Other experts think THAAD is unlikely to come up during Carter's visit.
China's reaction on the THAAD issue, very controversial. I don't think he's going to raise any controversial issues at all. Rather, he will say the U.S. commitment to the defense of South Korea.
China and Russia say THAAD threatens their national security because the system's radar has a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, meaning it would cover significant parts of their mainland territories. Sandwiched between Beijing and Washington, observers say Seoul must make its own objective decision and not be swayed by the superpowers. However, until official talks on THAAD materialize, the two countries will focus on trying to find common ground on security, military, and diplomatic issues at upcoming defense talks in Washington and Singapore. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
The top nuclear envoys from the United States and Russia met in Moscow on Thursday for discussions on long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization. Russia's foreign ministry said Sung Kim and Igor Morgulov talked about ways to restart the multilateral dialogue. Russia says it wants to get back to the negotiating table to ease political and military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. The ministry, however, gave no details on the closed-door meeting. It marked the first time since he became the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea that Sung Kim has visited Russia or met with any high-ranking Russian official. Now, Korea's exports are losing steam as the country's traditional growth engine. The contribution of outbound shipments to growth fell to a 5-year low last year due to sluggish demand abroad and falling global oil prices. OneJJ reports.
Just 1.5 percentage points from Korea's 3.3% growth last year came from exports of goods and services. That equals a contribution to growth rate of around 45%, the lowest reading since 2009, right after the global financial crisis. The Bank of Korea data shows that the contribution rate shot up to over 200% in 2011, but has been on a downward trend since then. Now, concern is building over the recovery pace of Asia's export powerhouse, Korea, as demand at home also remains fragile.
China's slowing growth is a major uncertainty for Korean exports, which rely heavily on the world's second-largest economy. It's unlikely that the domestic economy will improve drastically this year compared to 2014.
Korea's exports actually dropped for the third straight month in March, with a decline from February to March logging the biggest slump in over 2 years. The government blames the fall on the drop of international oil costs, which are keeping prices low for petrochemical products, one of the major exporting items. But even if oil-related products are not counted, outbound shipments rose a mere 0.2% in March from the previous year, pointing to sluggish demand from consumers worldwide. The government says it will devise short-term measures like strengthening the competitiveness of local small and mid-sized exporters. But experts add that it's more critical to diversify and expand Korea's exporting market to the Middle East and South and Central America. 황지혜, Arirang News.
Now it's very exciting times for fans of automobiles here in Korea because the Seoul Motor Show kicks off on this Friday, and automakers from around the world are rolling out new models and also concept cars in the hope of attracting potential buyers from around the world. For a peek into this event and the cars that are creating the buzz, our Kim Min-ji reports.
Flashy and sleek take center stage at this year's Seoul Motor Show, with major brands pulling out all the stops. Under the theme Experience the Technology, Feel the Artistry, automakers are showcasing models that fuse cutting-edge trends with sophisticated designs. Kia Motors pulled the curtain back on its much-anticipated revamped K5. The sedan is equipped with state-of-the-art tech, offering a safe drive and chic design that can appeal to drivers of all ages.
Cars are no longer limited to just the driving experience. It's a part of our everyday lives. Our focus was to make the car a part of the driver's lifestyle and culture.
Foreign brands are also making a big showing. Mini used the occasion to showcase its Mini Superleggera vision concept. It's gained attention for its roadster shape, unique styling, and classic interior. And riding on the environmentally friendly trend, a majority of local and foreign brands have also included green cars in their showcase lineup. BMW's i8 plug-in hybrid sports car made its local debut. The German car maker says it's a glimpse into the future and has even taken into consideration Korea's lack of infrastructure for such vehicles.
We've installed 120 charging facilities at supermarkets across the nation for customers to use.
More than 300 vehicles are on site, but if the showroom isn't enough, there's also a variety of hands-on activities visitors can check out, including driving simulations. The motor show runs through April 12th. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, spring is one of the best times of the year to pack your bag and go travelling. And to help, the Korean government has picked out 100 must-see destinations in the country. Our cultural correspondent, Kim Ji-yeon, shows us a handful of the locations worth checking out.
When the days start getting warmer after a long, cold winter, that's when the travel bug bites. So how about taking in some of the best attractions in Korea? The Tourism Ministry has rolled out its annual list of the top 100 places to visit. Standouts among them are 5 traditional palaces built during the Joseon Dynasty, all located in the capital city of Seoul. Sites where travelers can experience traditional culture were also included, such as the Bukchon Hanok Village, Insadong, and Namdaemun Market. But the top travel destinations are not just limited to the capital city. In fact, most of them are sites in Korea's southeastern Gyeongsang-do province, including the Bulguksa Temple. Built during the Seoul dynasty, the temple in Gyeongju City is not only a beloved relic, but also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Seoraksan Mountain in northeastern Gangwon Province also made the list, with its accessible hiking trails and panoramic views. And in the southernmost Jeju Island, there's a 90-meter-high crater at the top of the Seongsan Ilchulbong Peak. The crater was formed by a volcanic eruption 100,000 years ago and now serves as an ideal spot for horse riding. More information on these top travel spots can be found through the state-run Korea Tourism Organization. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
And TGI Friday, everyone, as we kick things off with the 2015 ANA Inspiration, the first LPGA major of the season, which teed off its first round of the event. And with so many golfers looking to claim the top prize, there are two players in the spotlight. Now, first off, for Hall of Famer Park Geun-hye, who finished tied for fourth last year, it's a chance for her to achieve a career Grand Slam, as she has won the LPGA Championship 3 times, U.S. Women's Open once, and the British Open back in 2001. But looking to outplay her is teenage sensation Lydia Ko, who seeks her first LPGA major and can become the youngest major winner at a young age of 17. Now, with the IBK Altos and the OK Savings Bank winning this year's V-League championship titles in the women's and men's league respectively, their next big quest, well, beating the Japanese champions. In an annual matchup which started back in 2006 is back in action after last year's event was canceled. But for volleyball fans here in the nation, it's a chance to see the two champions in Korea face off against the Japanese V-League champions, as the IBK Altos and the OK Savings Bank will take part in the event on March 12th in Seoul at the Changchung Gymnasium. And speaking of champions, the Ulsan Mobis Phoebus look to get a 3-0 series lead in the KBL Championship Series on Thursday night as they went up against Wonju Dongbu Promi, who desperately look to rebound from an 0-2 deficit. But Mobis with other plans here, trying to end the series early as they take a comfortable 40-29 lead going to halftime. But with Dongbu changing up their game plan the second half, they cut their deficit down to 53-52, hoping to continue the hot shooting in the fourth quarter. But with point guard Yang Yong-gun tearing it up from the paint with 23 points without a single foul, Mobis would run away with this game 80-72, as they're now one win away from their third straight championship title. Now, the Suwon KT Wiz might be struggling in their first season in the KBO League so far, but they've already gone viral all around the world for their unique ceremonial first pitch, and it didn't involve any rhythmic gymnasts. Now, with the Suwon KT Wiz kicking off their first KBO League game last Saturday, check out this ceremonial first pitch, a fireball which started off at the center field screens and made its way for a strike at the home plate. And while it did well everyone here in Korea, it also gone viral overseas as a number of media outlets have been talking about the hot first pitch. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ for your sports needs.
Good morning. It rained quite heavily at times last night, along with thunder and lightning, and Seoul received about 30 millimeters of rain, and other regions have also had a good amount of rainfall to help to ease the drought. And it seems like most of the rain clouds have moved out, so for those of you in the upper parts would need to carry out an umbrella today, but some parts in the southern coastal regions and Jeju are still seeing showers, but that rain clouds will gradually let up. And we have clear, unpolluted air this morning, down to a single figure here in the capital. So I hope you get to take an advantage of this good air quality throughout the day today. And top temperatures will be hovering upper teens to low 20s across the nation under a fair amount of sunshine. So let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The daytime high here in the capital will rise to 17, and Daegu and Gwangju will rise to 23 and 19, while Busan peak at 22 this afternoon. And as for the other regions. Jeju Island and Daejeon both should see a high of 18, while Dokdo gets up to 16. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's going to do it for now. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.